You might have noticed that some of the instruments we're playing today look a little bit different to the instruments that you might play at school, and we're going to give you a quick tour of the instruments that Vivaldi would have known 300 years ago. And we're going to start with Seb, who's going to tell us a little bit about the harpsichord.
So this wonderful instrument in front of me that I'm playing today is called the harpsichord. Now, the harpsichord was probably the most common keyboard instrument that was played by people before the piano was invented. When Signor Vivaldi was writing all his wonderful music, including the Four Seasons, we didn't really have the piano back then. So the harpsichord is the sort of grandparent of the piano. Now, if you've been listening to the music carefully, you'll have realized that the harpsichord sounds very different to the piano. And that's because the strings are plucked by a tiny little sort of strip that would have been made of bird feathers. Now they're made of plastic, but back in the day they would have been used with from the same material that pens were used, in the way that we now have our pens and pencils, but back in the day people used to write with quills. Some harpsichords, including this one, have two sets of keys, which help me vary the sound and the volume that I can produce. Now, a very famous conductor of an orchestra once said that the sound of the harpsichord reminded him of skeletons dancing on a tin roof. What a fantastic image. And sometimes when I'm playing, I'm thinking of those skeletons on the roof. And that's partly because of the plucked sound, but also because we can play lots of notes at the same time. Okay. And I'm now going to play a short section of a piece by a German composer called J.S. Bach, and a little later on you'll hear Miri on the cello also play some J.S. Bach. This piece, for me, whenever I hear it, because of the fast, furious notes, just like in the summer rainstorm we heard just then, very much brings to my mind those skeletons making a right racket on the roof. So that's a short introduction into the wonderful world of the harpsichord. Now we're going to learn a bit about the trumpet.
So here we have a trumpet, that Vivaldi would have known. This is what it would have looked like in Vivaldi's time. And you can see it's really quite different to the trumpet or the cornet that you might have played or that you might recognize. I'm going to play you a little tune in a minute, but let me show you what the big differences are. I'm sure you can spot them. For a start, it's a lot longer. It's about double the tubing that we need on a modern trumpet. So it's a lot longer, have to blow a little bit harder. And the big thing as well, we don't have any valves to press down. Again, in a second, when I show you the modern trumpet, you'll see that I can press down lots of different valves to make lots of different notes. And if you look very closely, we've kind of got these little recorder holes, which help us to keep a few more of the notes in tune. We can't play that much on this Baroque trumpet, but the way I like to think of it is that composers from the time, like Vivaldi and Handel and Bach, saved the best bits for the trumpet. So we get to just pop in and out and play the really great moments. The trumpet goes all the way back to Egyptian and Roman times, so it's a very, very old instrument. And it was used on the battlefield and also for fanfares to welcome kings and queens. And that's a little fanfare that I'm going to play for you now, by another Baroque composer called Henry Purcell. This is a fanfare from a piece called King Arthur. So as you can see, quite a loud instrument, perfect for playing outside for fanfares or on the battlefield. Let me show you a little bit of the modern trumpet, and first of all, let's see how much smaller it is. There we go, you can see straight away that the Baroque trumpet's a lot longer, and maybe you can see the big difference now coming into play is that we've got valves. Now, valves are great things for trumpeters because it means we can play a little bit more, we can be involved a little bit more. And the trumpet now, in modern times, is a really amazing instrument for playing lots of different styles of music. It can play in jazz music, it can play in pop music, it can play in classical music, and it can play in film music. And some of the most famous film scores feature the trumpet. Because of my valves, as I say, I can play some more notes. Let's hear them. So it lets me play a lot more, lets me get involved. My final little instrument that I'm going to show you is possibly my favourite, and we love taking this to schools, usually, so hopefully you can try this one at home. You need a mouthpiece. Now, you've seen me fiddling around with my mouthpiece all the way through this. This is the most important part, because without a mouthpiece, if I blow into the trumpet, it doesn't really work. So the mouthpiece is a bit like a microphone, that when I make a little funny noise with my lips, and then I put the microphone on it, the mouthpiece on it, I start to get some even more interesting sounds, and you can probably hear me going up and down, which means I'm tightening and relaxing my lips to make different sounds. But let me show you my favourite instrument. If we were going to be really horrible to the Baroque trumpet and stretch it out so that we just had a big long piece of metal, which would be an awful thing to do, we'd kind of be left with this, which is a garden hose pipe, but we're going to imagine it's a piece of metal, stretched out, nice and long. And I've also added this funny thing on at the end. Again, if you look at the Baroque trumpet, or any trumpet, you'll see that this bit looks a bit like a bell. We call that the bell of the trumpet, where the sound comes out from. The hose pipe does the same thing. So if I put my mouthpiece into the hose pipe, I can actually play a tune. I'm going to bend the tube up a little bit just to make it a bit easier to hold. This tune is by Handel, another famous Baroque composer from the water music, and he wrote that piece for the River Thames, big party on the River Thames, 9 trumpets at the same time, so it would have been quite loud. It's called the hornpipe, this piece, so I'm playing the hornpipe on the hose pipe. there is your hosepipe trumpet. If you've got a mouthpiece, have a go at home. Next in our tour is over to Miri and her cello.
Hello everyone, my name is Miri and this is my cello. The cello is a member of the string family of musical instruments, so its siblings are the violin, the viola and the double bass. Because we are string family members, we can pluck these strings to make them vibrate and make sound, or we can use a bow gliding across them like this. Usually I'd be sitting down. So my cello here is actually incredibly old. It was born in 1828, so it's almost 200 years old. So 1828 was around the time of the Georgians in England, where ladies wore huge dresses and people would attend balls rather than discos and things like that. So just like clothes were different, my cello is different to the types of cello that you would see today, what we refer to as the modern cello. First of all, this cello doesn't have a spike. The spike is the metal bit that goes down into the ground. The spike came into the cello world a lot later than 1828, when concert halls were getting bigger and the cello needed to be louder. The spike helps the cello have a more focused sound and to project further to fill big spaces. Another difference to the sound is that these strings here are actually made from sheep gut. But don't worry, just like you'd wear leather shoes or have a leather handbag, my strings are completely safe and clean for me to use. They create a bit of a softer sound compared to the modern cello. The other thing you might have noticed is the shape of my bow here. So as you can see, it arches in the middle, and it's called a baroque bow because it helps us shape baroque notes in a more stylistic manner. So it's bigger in the middle and tapers off towards the end. And if you listen to baroque music very carefully, you can hear that shape in some of the notes. My favorite thing about this cello is actually on the back, where I've got this gorgeous diamond pattern. And my favorite thing to play on the cello is the music of J.S. Bach. Bach wrote 6 suites for unaccompanied cello. Bach was a Baroque composer as well. And each suite starts with a prelude and then has some dance movements afterwards. The piece I'm about to play for you, before Miriam will tell you about her recorders, is the jig from the suite number 1 in G major.
The last instrument that we're going to introduce you to today is my favourite, the recorder family. Now, the recorder is actually a really old instrument. Its ancestors date all the way back to the Neolithic period, so that's the Stone Age, where, of course, they might have looked a bit different. They probably would have been made from an animal's bone, but otherwise they'd be pretty similar. We blow straight into the top. There's no mouthpiece, like on the trumpet, or a reed, like on a clarinet or a saxophone. The sound travels all the way down here, and we control it by moving our fingers to change the notes. And most importantly, the sound comes out of this special window right here at the top. Now, in the Four Seasons this afternoon, you'll see me playing 3 different sizes of the recorder. Probably the most familiar to you will be this one, the descant recorder, which is often taught in primary schools in England. In fact, your recorders might look a little bit different to mine because they're normally made of plastic. This was invented just after World War II as a way for all the children to be able to enjoy music, but without it costing very much money. Actually, the original designs were not very good, and if you left your recorder in the sunshine, you would find that it would melt. But nowadays, they've perfected the design, and there's 3.5 million new plastic recorders made every single year. So if you're learning this at school, you are in great company. The other two instruments you'll hear this afternoon are the sopranino recorder, which you heard at the beginning pretending to be a little bird, and the treble recorder. You can see that's the biggest of the three. And in our recorder family, the rule is the smaller the instrument, the higher the sound. Therefore, the bigger the instrument, the lower the sound. Now, not many people know that the recorder actually comes in all different shapes and sizes. And with some difficulty, I've chosen my two favourites today to bring you so that you can see what those different shapes and sizes might look like. This here is my favourite recorder. It's called the Garklein, which in Old German basically means super duper small. In fact, it's so small that my big adult hands would be too big to play it normally. And so what they've done is they've curved the holes around the edge so I can squeeze my fingers on, and we could probably predict it makes a very high sound. So for that reason, I don't play it very often. The other recorder I've chosen to show you today is called the Great Bass Recorder. You can see this looks very different to the recorders that I've shown you already. It's got a bend in the top, which is just there to make it a little easier for me to play. If it was in a straight line, I'd need a neck extension to be able to blow into it. It's also different because it has keys down the front. They're just to help me reach the holes because otherwise my hands wouldn't be big enough. Now, before we get back to our story, I thought I'd just play you a quick piece on this great bass recorder so you can hear the difference, how different it sounds to the high recorders. I think it's much calmer and a bit more relaxing to listen to. This tune was collected by Barsanti at the same time Vivaldi was writing from Scotland.
There's our quick tour of the instruments that we play that Vivaldi might have known.